The third one on our list is argument from ignorance. And I must admit, it's kind of one of my favorites. Although I must admit, I like all the fallacies. I think they're all very interesting problems about reasoning. But the argument of ignorance seems to be, at least in my experience, one that is growing in a kind of strange popularity. Anyways, let's have a look at it. The standard, it comes in a variety of forms, but the one we're going to look at goes like this. You cannot disprove X, so X must be true. In other words, if I put forward something, some position or some kind of claim, and you can't show that it's false, somehow that's evidence in some way that it must be true. Well, you can't disprove it, so it's got to be true in some way. That's interesting. It sounds fairly logical, but it is deeply problematic. Think about it. Suppose I said something like unicorns exist, right? And I say disprove it, right? I'm going to maintain that unicorns exist, and hey, it's up to you to disprove it. Well, there's a couple of things that I would like you to think about here. First off, why is it the case that I am presenting this, interesting and kind of strange thesis that unicorns exist, and yet it's not up to me to prove it, right? So, in other words, the argument from ignorance really shifts what we call the burden of proof, right? So if I say unicorns exist, I say you have to prove me wrong. Why don't I have to prove that I'm right? So that's something to always consider in an argument. When people make claims, it is, very questionable whether or not you get to just make a claim and then offer no reasoning or no proof for it, and then just demand everyone else disprove it, right? So that certainly doesn't fly in science. You can't just say anything you want and then say to the other scientists, well, if you can't disprove it, it's got to be true. But think about if you even tried to disprove it. Think about this. Unicorns exist. Try and disprove that. So everything you say to me, well, I look around, I don't see any unicorns, and I could say things like, well, because they're pretty good at hiding, and you just haven't seen one. Maybe you'll see one tomorrow. So there is a way to, shall we say, have, for someone who's pushing this notion of unicorns existing, they could respond to a lot of the criticisms, but yet I don't think any of us would say, oh, well, that's a good argument, because I haven't seen unicorns. It doesn't actually refute the claim that they exist, so they must exist. No, this is an example of bad reasoning. And once again, it shifts the burden of the argument. And so the reason why I say it's increasingly popular is I do hear more and more claims being made, and then it's up to other people to refute the claim. So to say something like, well, the absence of or your inability to refute what I'm saying is somehow evidence that it's impossible to refute what I'm saying. That's clearly a bad inference to go from, a current state of the absence of evidence to a permanent state of the absence of evidence. Or, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, right? To use that old expression. So keep in mind that this argument from ignorance, it's a fallacy, it's a bad form of reasoning in this particular case, but it crops up a lot where people are sort of offloading the burden of when a position is being put forward. Who's supposed to deal with it? Isn't it the person who wants to say something about the universe, and if it's complicated or controversial, isn't it the speaker responsibility to defend and show that it's the case? It's not other people's responsibility to refute it. So that's the general form, but be on the lookout because it crops up in a variety of ways in daily life newspapers and on the internet, etc., etc.